So one of the most common questions as realtors that we get is this a good time to buy? And I have to tell you, do not ask realtors that. That's the equivalent of going to your barber and basically saying, hey, should I get a haircut? Chances are the answer is yes. Whether or not you actually need a haircut, that's a completely different thing. It's entirely based on you. So I decided, you know what, let's go off the cuff and talk about what I believe is a framework that I used 15 years ago with the purchase of my own home that I think is very much relevant today. If anything, that framework that subconsciously developed in my mind through just good people that I was surrounded with and the people I was learning from, it is probably more relevant today than it was 15 years ago when I bought my house. We need to kind of put aside the whole thing of like, buy now, you're going to be priced out forever. We know that is nonsense, but we also, on the contrary, we have to put aside that wait for the crash, because wait for the crash is an unquantifiable thing. We don't know what that means. When is the crash? When's the bottom? Nobody knows. So we're going to talk about this in a structural way. When should you buy structurally based on your life circumstances? Does it make sense? And the answer is going to be very different. So obviously I can't tell you specifically if you should buy, but at least I'll give you the tools to kind of look at your situation objectively and kind of think, hey, is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? So let's get right into it. So we'll have to talk about the first thing you're going to have to discuss or look into is your income stability. And by that, I'm talking about the type of industry you're in, the type of job you have. What are you doing? I'll give an example between myself and my girlfriend, wife now, what we were doing before we purchased this house and how I thought about it. I am a CPA by training, so that is a chartered professional accountant. I graduated 08, 09 when things were not good. So we're going through the financial crisis. And speaking of which, the first job offer that I received, the offer actually got rescinded, meaning they pulled it back because they hired too many people. And given where the economy was, they're like, hey, this guy, cut him out. And honestly, they kind of were right to do that. My marks were not that good. And as far as being an accountant, I probably didn't make the best accountant. Just I don't have the capacity to stare at bank reconciliations for 12 hours a day. But anyway, I digress. We're not going to talk about that. The trajectory of an accountant back then was pretty similar. The numbers have changed, so I can't speak to current numbers. But back then, I think my starting salary was like $40,000 or $45,000. When you get your designation 3 years later, you get bumped to 70 or 80,000, and then from there on, it just the world's your oyster. If you become a controller, like I did, you can make 120 or 150, and then if you go past the controller, which I also did, you can make anywhere between 150 to 250 as director level, and then beyond that, once you get into the VP level or CFO, at that point, I mean, you could be making a ton of money. When I went to get pre-approved for a mortgage in 2010, that's when I started shopping. I was getting pre-approved, and I think on a salary of about $70,000. And my wife at the time wasn't working. She was going through teacher's college. She wanted to be a teacher. In my mind, the way I looked at it is, okay, if I'm making $70,000 now, and my earning potential is at the very least double this in the next 10 years, which is a reasonable assumption to make, then I said, okay, I can probably stretch myself on the purchase now, buy the house I want so that I don't have to buy something smaller now and then have to upgrade in the future. Like I don't want to start with a condo and then buy a townhouse and then from a townhouse go to a detached. If I can get a detached, maybe in a rundown shape, maybe not in the best neighborhood, but where I see potential, maybe that's the move. So that's how I was thinking about it. So I think for you, those of you thinking whether or not you should buy, so income potential, where are you on that scale? So for example, if you're currently tapped out at whatever amount you're making and there's not much more room to grow, and if it's the same for your spouse, and at that income, you're simply not able to make it work in a property that you would be happy in, then the answer is very clear. It's absolutely, there's just no point to buy. So you might as well just keep renting. By the way, if you like the video, don't be shy, like it and subscribe, because this is the stuff that kind of keeps me motivated to keep coming back. And if you want a second opinion, I really kind of enjoy actually helping people on the come up. So book a Calendly call. I will give you my second opinion, unbiased, and you do as you wish. But take me up on it. I'm telling you, I personally enjoy it, and I think you will too. But anyway, let's get back to the examples. On the income stability front, obviously, one thing is where you are on that income curve, how hireable you are in the event you did lose your job, and what your industry is like. So for example, if you're working in the construction sector, obviously it's going to be a lot different than somebody working in banking, right? One is cyclical, one really isn't. No job is safe, and there's going to be always pressures from the outside world. Now it's AI, for example, where there's going to be risk with every single job. But at one point, nobody's job is ever really safe. And you got to remember, when I did this in 2008, 2009, like jobs weren't all that easy to find, right? Like we had the financial crisis. But at one point, you have to put your big boy pants, big girl pants, and make a decision as to whether or not you want to be an owner or not. And I believe in Canada, you have to, at the very least, strive to own your principal residence, because it is the one thing that is available to normal people where the gains on that are tax-free. And that, I think, is going to remain like that indefinitely. And you should take advantage of that. So that is in the income stability front. You really have to start there, see where you're at. It's going to be challenging to have two people that have very stable jobs and very high income potential, but at least if one of you has it, do the math and see where that lands you. 5 years from now when you're making more money based on this much spend on house now, does that make sense? Will that afford you a comfortable lifestyle where you're going to be happy? Once you've answered that, I think it becomes very clear whether or not you're in a position to purchase or not, and if you should feel comfortable going through with something like this. Now, the second thing we're going to talk about is time horizon, and this one's pretty self-explanatory. I personally don't believe in buying anything unless you plan on living in it for 7 to 10 years. Just that's it, full stop. I have had properties in the past where I've bought and held for 18 months, investment properties, but with your primary residence, my advice is you have to be content and happy with whatever you're buying, because you do not want to be going through this process of, in 3 years, you know what, I've outgrown my house, I want to get into something bigger. Not worth it. It will cost you. If that's the case, maybe at that point either adjust your expectations or figure out how you're going to get the income where you can hopefully buy something you're going to be happy with for at least 10 years. And now we're going to talk about number 3, which is what I call optionality, or this is where we're going to talk about more about the type of house you're buying and the type of neighborhood you're buying. Obviously, I think for most people, the end goal is a detached home, but obviously that is also not a reality for most people. So the way I would think about this is, ideally, you want to avoid condos or condo townhouses, not because they're bad, but because that is a transient product. So that is usually a product that people will buy and then they aspire to get into something that is freehold or detached. So you kind of want to avoid the step of doing that, because there's going to be the friction cost and the expense of actually selling it to then buy the detached. If you're able to stretch to a detached, maybe it's not in the best neighborhood or not in your perfect neighborhood, but it's in a good neighborhood. Maybe it's not as big as you want. Maybe it's a little bit on the smaller side, but it's still a detached or a freehold townhouse, for example. That is probably where I would set my sights in terms of what I would want if I was doing this. I want to avoid personally, and in this framework, you want to avoid having this condo start or a condo townhouse and then jumping into a detached or a freehold. Now, I understand that is not always available. And if you're a single person, then obviously this whole thing is irrelevant. Chances are you're going to be much better off in a condo than just buying to a really good condo, because you're going to stay there for a long time. But for assuming it's a couple, you want to start a family, you need a space, you want a freehold townhouse or a semi or a detached home, the first thing I would do is I would probably avoid the best neighborhood, so the best rated schools and all that stuff. So what I would say is you want to buy in a neighborhood adjacent to a best neighborhood. So in Markham, you have certain areas that they're known for their schools, and they do carry a price premium of about $100,000 to $200,000 more than maybe if you go across the street in a different school catchment. And that is okay. You don't need to be in the absolute best ranked school. For example, in Markham, you're already ahead of the game whether it's elementary or high school. So do you really need to be in the best one at the cost of another $200,000 to $300,000 more, and the stress that's going to induce on you? Probably not. So I would try to get into an adjacent neighborhood to a good area. That's what I did when I was doing this 15 years ago. The neighborhood I wanted to go into, Unionville, I'm calling you out, Unionville, was a lot more than I could afford at the time. So I had to go to a lesser neighborhood that is now basically catching up. So in fact, looking at the numbers, I've done a lot better owning in this adjacent neighborhood that is not as desired, or it wasn't as desired back 15 years ago as much as Unionville was, but it is now. And you could kind of see it happening because a lot of people can't afford these super expensive areas, so they're going to find a way to go somewhere else. Case in point, Leslieville in Toronto. Leslieville was a dumpy little place 15 years ago. I remember when I started my search, in 2010, I was looking to buy in East York, and there's still parts of East York that are cheaper. Leslieville at that time was much cheaper, and the growth that has happened there is incredible because close to downtown, lots of families have moved in, and now it's extremely expensive. So what do you want to do? You want to be Leslieville adjacent. So you might not want to You might not be able to get into Leslieville proper, but there are adjacent pockets where you could get in and still have that benefit. And ultimately, other people are going to kind of catch on, and they're going to likely go to where they see more value, so they're not paying for the premium of the specific branded neighborhood. So like the Unionvilles, for example, or the Leslievilles or the Lee Sides. These are branded blue chip neighborhoods now, which carry way more premium than I personally find it's worth. That's my opinion. But anyway, that's kind of how you think about the neighborhood. You want to be in a neighborhood adjacent to a good neighborhood where you basically get carried with them, but chances are you're going to get in lower and you're going to have higher appreciation over the long term. Now, the second thing is, and this is something that I think most people unfortunately overlook, but you want a property with optionality. So what I mean by that is when I bought our first property, I was absolutely stretched. Like I literally had no money for anything except paying the mortgage and just surviving. That's it. That's all I could do on my salary. My girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife, she wasn't working yet. She was still in university, so there was no money on that end. So I had to carry this house knowing that eventually her income is going to come, so everything would be much easier. But I had to basically go to Habitat for Humanity, or Restore as they call it now, Kijiji, Facebook, and basically just buy a bunch of stuff. And I rented out my basement. I retrofitted my basement. I did an awful job. I think it was like a $6,000 basement apartment renovation. You can just imagine how would that look like. But it worked, and I rented it out to a friend of mine for 2 years, and him paying that rent was incredibly helpful. Incredibly helpful. And I have absolutely no regrets. It was probably one of the best things. But obviously, if you're in a condo or a condo townhouse, you don't have the optionality to really rent out a basement. There's nothing to rent. I guess you could rent a room, but it's not ideal. I would not want to do that. But if you're in a semi, if you're in a townhouse, if you're in a detached home, you could, with some money, have a basement apartment. And how you do that is up to you. Obviously, ideally, you want to, if you can buy one that already has a legal basement apartment, even better. And right now, there's almost next to no premium for basement apartments when you're buying detached homes. It's insane. During COVID, you would be paying $100,000 more to have that feature. Now, it's almost like a wash. So the optionality is you want to be in a neighborhood adjacent to a good neighborhood. That's number one. And you want a property with optionality where you can rent it out. In fact, at one point, I actually thought about moving into the basement myself and then renting out the upstairs to get more money. But my wife put a quick end to that. She said no. So that was probably the right decision. But I was all for it. I don't care. I hope that helps. So we're talking about your income stability, your industry, the cyclicality of your industry and your job. Number two is your time horizon. You have to be able to sit in this place and be happy for the next 10 years. You have to put your long-term lens on for all this stuff. And then number three, don't get fancy, have realistic expectations. Buy something that's dated, something that needs renovations. It's okay to live in something that doesn't have an updated kitchen. Our kitchen on this house was, I think, from the 70s. And we lived with that for, I think, 3 years before we renovated all of it. We renovated the whole place ultimately, but out of the gate, the place, I had shag carpet, pink, from 1972. Anyway, I hope that helps.